Serhiy Leshchenko gave a annual speech, kind of is for at a conference called EU-Ukraine Quo Vadis, held at the University of Manchester this month, and it was a workshop that I was invited to participate in, to give a talk in, and so it was interesting to hear Serhiy Leshchenko because he's a well-known investigative journalist from Ukrainska Pravda, but he's also quite famous for being a dissident in the ranks of the Poroshenko bloc, and he hasn't followed two other deputies who, in opposition to Poroshenko, resigned their seats. In Ukraine's legislation, if you are elected in a party, if you resign, then you can't go to another faction, you lose your seat. You can only resign from a faction and keep your seat if you were elected in a single mandate district, in a majoritarian district. So Tamenko, for example, resigned. Leshchenko's continued to remain a Poroshenko deputy, even though he's a major critic of Poroshenko. During his talk, he basically discussed different areas of progress in Ukraine's reforms, which areas still need to be done. And in the question and answer session, what to me I wanted to raise was why he had not really discussed or raised the question of the 4 de-communization laws which had been adopted by Ukraine in the spring of 2015. Were they not important reforms as well? Serhiy Leshchenko's answer was very, very interesting because he said that these decommunization laws were not reforms. They were just really a sidetrack from reforms. This kind of threw me a bit, but I understood where he was coming from because he's a Russian-speaking Ukrainian journalist. And just like many English people, they cannot understand the nationality question, and they cannot understand the threat to a country's language and culture. Same way the English couldn't never understand that about the Irish. Russian speakers cannot understand the sort of the emotional concern of a people that feels it's threatened by assimilation or Russification. And I think this comes from this. It also comes from his viewpoint that, and I think it's wrong, that decommunization is basically a ploy by President Poroshenko to also mobilize a core nationalist constituency to vote for him in the next elections. So this is like an election gimmick in Leshchenko's eyes by President Poroshenko, not really done something from the heart. Again, I would disagree with this. And on many occasions, therefore, Leshchenko compared Poroshenko to Yanukovych, which I think is unfair. He compared him in the sense that Yanukovych also appealed to that core constituency of voters who were Sovietophile, Russophile, anti-NATO, pro-Russian language, and then which was helped by Paul Manafort's advice, by the way, in mobilizing and dividing Ukraine into, two groups. So he believes that Poroshenko's also appeals to nationalism or patriotism are attempts to do the same thing, to win elections, to win voters, and they are done because Poroshenko no longer supports reform and no longer is a liberal in his eyes. I think this is a wrong way to approach it, and it kind of ignores the national revolution that's taken place in Ukraine since 2014. The difference between, one of the major differences between the Euromaidan and Orange Revolution, there were many differences, but one of the major differences was that the Euromaidan revolution did have a nationalist or a national patriotic component, which wasn't the case in the Orange Revolution, really. There it was more democratic and civic. And that was obviously in response to Yanukovych's 4 years of Russophile, Sovietophile, anti-Ukrainian discriminatory policies, and the fear that if Yanukovych remained in power, God knows how much would be left of Ukrainian identity by 2020. So you can't as it were, divorce the Euromaidan revolution from the national component, especially in the light of Putin's claims that Ukrainians and Russians are one people, that there's Russian military aggression against eastern Ukraine, and of course the annexation of the Crimea. So I think the national question is there, and nation-building issues, national identity issues are inevitable. I wrote about this nearly 2 decades ago in an academic article where I described transition in post-Soviet states like Ukraine as a quadruple transition, not a triple transition as often described as, but as a quadruple, meaning democratization, market economy, state building, and nation building. So this is more like post-colonial nation building. And this is especially the case today. I was surprised that he, as it were, rubbished the decommunization laws as not important, and I was surprised for a variety of reasons. Firstly, let's not forget that there would be no democratic Germany today without denazification. The very fact that the far right in Germany is not really popular until recently, compared to Austria, Italy, and elsewhere, is because only the Germans amongst the Axis powers did a thorough denazification process. The Austrians didn't, the Italians didn't, and the Japanese didn't, really. So only the Germans. And that denazification process was long and arduous. The first trials of Auschwitz commanders and guards didn't take place in Germany till the late 50s, early 60s. So this was a long process, but it was part and parcel of the process of creating a democratic Germany anchored in Europe. And I see the same factors in Ukraine, that to create a democratic Ukraine anchored in Europe requires decommunization, de-sovietization. For the same reasons, they are vital to Ukraine. Sadly, amongst some people, both academics like David Marples and in the West, who refuse to acknowledge the similarities of Nazi crimes and Soviet and communist crimes. The same thing with liberal Russian speakers who cannot understand the centrality of founding, of building a democratic country, that you need to battle against the remnants of the old society, which is often still in the minds of people, in symbols, in street names, in holidays, and such like. And so it's surprising that what that shows to me is that of one of the cleavages in Ukrainian politics that often is not talked about isn't just one between, there isn't just a cleavage between, say, pro-Russian, pro-Ukrainian camps, but even within the pro-European camp, there are going to be people with, shall we say, liberal, globalizing viewpoints who don't really place much emphasis on building a nation state, don't place much emphasis on building Ukrainian national identity and protecting Ukrainian language, such as Serhiy Leshchenko, and others who believe that they are very, very central to creating a democratic and European country. So I think these two are cleavages. I think the liberal camp is actually the smallest of the two, because I think that opinion polls show that decommunization, de-sovietization has strong majority support. It's gone ahead rapidly in the last 2 or 3 years. Nearly 2,000 monuments and street sort of plaques have been taken down, particularly in eastern and southern Ukraine, and without really any opposition by the local authorities or local public. So this viewpoint that this is a kind of a sideshow to something more important has not been shown to be seen in public opinion, but it's also a wrong way to look at it, because you shouldn't divorce the two from each other. They are all part and parcel of the same process of taking Ukraine out of the totalitarian mindset of the Soviet Union and building a new democratic political culture and mindset in Ukrainians. The Germans had to do that after World War II, and the Ukrainians are doing that today. And the four decommunization laws provide many other examples which are highly positive for Ukraine. Ukraine today has one of the freest access to Soviet archives in any of the 27 post-communist states. That is a major achievement for Ukraine. Thousands of Ukrainians have approached the archives to seek information about their family members who were murdered in the Soviet regime. These are figures given to me by the director of the archives, Andriy Kohut. Hundreds of Western academics have worked in those archives and are publishing or have published books based on those archives. They have nothing but praise for Ukraine for opening them up to that extent. There's nothing like that anywhere else in the former USSR, except for the three Baltic states. Also, taking the mindset out of the Russian mir, Ruski mir, Russian world, has been looking at World War II as one major entity from 1939 to 1945, and not in the Russian or Stalinist narrative of 1941 to 1945, ignoring 3 years of Nazi-Soviet collaboration. Let's not forget that the first battle against Nazi and fascist forces was undertaken by Ukrainians in March 1939 in Carpatho-Ukraine. Everybody forgets this. The actual war began in September 39, but Ukrainians were fighting fascist Hungarians allied to the Nazis already in March of that year. So this and celebrating the end of World War II on the 8th of May, not 9th of May as in Moscow, all of these are very symbolically important for developing a democratic European political culture. It's a pity that individuals who frequently travel to the West, because very few Ukrainian journalists and political leaders know English, so Serhiy Leshchenko is often in the West. It's a pity that people like Leshchenko don't understand these questions. If they were only just to read up about Germany after World War II, they would see how important denazification was to building a democratic Germany. Thank you.